the folks who aren't here, and then if you want to reference it later on, it'll be there. Um, and so, yes, I'm going to share my screen. And what happens when I share my screen is it minimizes my window for being able to see your comments. Um, I can see it, but it's like a flashing. WebEx is a little funky. And that it has a minimized window that only shows a glancing of somebody's comment and then it disappears. So raise your hand and I'll be coming back and forth from the bigger window to the smaller window. Um, it's really in anthropology being this class, I consider it a very much, well, a discussion class. And something that I completely kind of rely upon having interactions and group conversations. This is just not the most ideal platform, to say the least, but it is what we have. And let me the PowerPoint. Before we get started with the PowerPoint, are there any initial questions up front before? Um, I mean, it's from the experience of this week. Anything off the top of your head right now before we get into it? Nothing? Okay. All right. So, what we are, where we are going to be eventually is in the branch building. Um, the branch building is formerly CAT, and it's actually marked as CAT, I think, on campus still. It might even be on the website marked as CAT, but it is called Branch now. And if you were not here 2 years ago, that means that you probably have never been in the CAT building because it's been being remodeled for the last year and a half. My office is there at 74, and our classroom is there at 77. So um, that is where you can find me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Monday and Wednesdays and Fridays, typically I'm at home, but I can sometimes be on campus on those days for special meetings. But my pattern for being on campus these last couple years have been pretty much well that as said. Um, Contacting me is, yes, that contact information is on the front page of the homepage of our eLearn site. Um, so I'm letting people in. Um, so that has my phone number. It has, you know, it will have my office hours very soon. So the days I'm not on campus are days that I actually like to meet with students. But I'll be meeting from my home, phone or a virtual call. Um, but we definitely can meet on Fridays, Mondays and Wednesdays, Tuesdays and Thursdays before and after class. That's fine too. Um, so yeah, I definitely if you want to set up a meeting, I highly recommend email me before you do anything, unless you want to talk to me in person after class or before to set it up. But emailing me, I have my my calendar online, so it's nice to be able to have that accessible whenever I'm contacted by you. Um, Textbook. Our textbook is a free textbook. I don't know if people are starting to run into this more and more, but it's an OER textbook, Open Educational Resource Textbook. And yes, thank you. Um, that was I'm sorry, I don't see the names but somebody just raised it's a book called The Art of Being Human, and if you have a hard copy, then that is what it looks like right there on the screen. Um, and I'm sorry, who is that that's raising the book?
Michelle.
Michelle. Thank you,
Michelle
Michelle.
McCall.
Yes, I think that probably cost you about $15 if you buy it in the hard copy. Um, I I even with free textbooks, I would be trying to get a hard copy myself because just because I like to make notes in the margins. So it's up to you though. I have everything is loaded in eLearn as far as the textbook goes. There's also links for getting the textbook and at the author's Professor Wesch's website. So you can get it in three different places. Hard copy on Professor Wesch's website and in eLearn. It's very available to say the least. And it's not only that, but it's very available when you read it because it is one of the what sold me on this textbook more than anything is this accessibility and how easy it is to read. And not only that, is it easy, it's not dumbed down. It's gives you the complexity of anthropology and in that it provides a nice avenue into understanding how an anthropologist needs to uh, see the world or can see the world, that is, and what is kind of definitive about understanding differences and oneself. And a lot of these a lot of it is self-exploratory. So it's a lot of experiential, self-exploratory work that we're going to do this semester. Um, so the syllabus is something that I hope everybody has read already because it is definitely it is the map for our semester, and you have to pass that syllabus quiz before you can gain access to the rest of the course shell. That quiz is 10 questions, and you can take as many times as you like to get, obviously, to get the 100% so that you can have access to the course. It is also the way that if I'll give you presents in TigerWeb once you pass that quiz. Actually, if you're in this class today, you get presents as well. But anyway, so syllabus quiz is really important. I've had students in the past that will contact me like halfway through and say, or a couple weeks into the course, which is almost halfway through in a 7-week semester, and say, I don't see where lesson 2 is. I said, well, you haven't passed the quiz yet. So you got to pass that quiz to see the course. There are 10 lessons, and it is almost averages out to a lesson per class, except for I think 3 or 4 of the lessons we spend 2 classes in. I do the math there, but it's 10 lessons, um, and they have 10 quizzes. Each quiz is multiple choice, true, false. There's 1 or 2 fill in the blanks. And typically they are by the way, there are no essays on the quizzes. So there used to be an essay on every quiz, but I changed that. So the quizzes are just multiple choice, true, false, and 1 or 2 fill in the blanks. They're not cumulative, but if you miss one, or if you have a low score on one of them, you can take the cumulative end of the semester optional exam that covers the entire semester, to replace the 0 or to replace the low score. There are 10 reflections, one reflection per quiz, and these reflections are all different. Um, they're very much, well, you talking to me just privately, basically. This is not something on a discussion board. They're dropped in a Dropbox. The questions are sometimes very personal as far as your experience, and how you relate to each lesson within your personal life, or how you see the world. So yeah, these reflections are really important. They're major writing component to this class. but most, everything's important here. The challenges, though, are the foundation for this course. Each lesson has a challenge, and you are required to do at least 7 of those challenges. Let me make sure. I thought I heard. Okay, nobody's trying to get in. So these challenges, of course, we're going to take one at a time, and we'll be looking at them individually as they come up. One, so 1 or 2, you have these choices between 1 or 2. 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 are all required. 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all required. 7 or 8, you have a choice between. And then 10 is you really can't pass the class without doing 10, which is a final reflection. And it's a way for you to look back at your semester. That's the final exam, so to speak. Lesson 9 has an optional extra credit hero story that you can write of yourself. And so you have some extra credit built into this entire semester. Extra credit you could do all of those optional ones. So if you choose 1 or 2, say you choose 1, but you decide you want to do 2 as well, so you can do 2 for extra credit. And same thing with 7 or 8. So lots of extra credit built into these this semester. That way that you have a chance to catch up if you get behind. Class attendance is not officially required, but I really favor attendance. And I really hope that the class is engaging enough that it's not like a task to get to, to have to come into class. I think it's interesting material, and but if you come to class, though, how I approach people in class versus students online, it's inherently different. If you want to, yeah, you can pass this class if you stay at home and do the assignments from home. But as far as if you have a late assignment, or if you have missed an assignment, or if you've whatever the case is, if you have an 88 going into or 89 going into the final grade, I'm going to bump it up to a 90 if you're coming to class. Just be completely frank. If you're not coming to class, it's a number to me. To be honest, this is an on-ground class, and it's designed for conversation in the classroom. Yes, there's lecturing going on. And I'm trying every semester to make it less about me and more about trying to create a conversation. But anyway, class attendance, late assignments. So when an assignment is due, say the 10 challenge assignments, then yes, if it's late, that's 10% off per day that it's late. I allow for everybody to have 1 late assignment without that 10% off. Look, it's a 7-week semester. I'm asking you to do a lot of work in that 7 weeks. So I am about flexibility. So this is I want to work with your students, and if you're coming to class and I see your face, then it's something that I definitely, you come and talk to me in person. I'm a sucker. I totally, I want to work with you. And so, yes, any questions about these highlights? This is just sort of, I just put together the main points of the syllabus that I want to bring out. It's on you. So this is a 50-50. This is a hybrid, 50% online, 50% on ground. So a lot of the work, especially missing that first class, getting to know the semester, getting to know the class, is on you. It's on you. I'm going to break away from my screen real quick and see if there's any chatting I'm missing. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything. So I assume that there's no questions at this point. Okay, so let's talk about the schedule at least for the first 2 weeks. Obviously, class, the introductions, when we get into the classroom on Tuesday next week, we will have, we'll have some introductions that are personal. Like I'll talk a little bit about why, well, I'm going to talk a lot about myself today in the PowerPoint. So I'm not going to have to tell you much about me on Tuesday. But I want to hear about from you on Tuesday why you're in the class and hear a little bit about what yourself. That'll shift over to the 18th. I mean, the 23rd, I think, 23rd next week. So look, this is how the calendar is set up. You have the class periods in red, and you have the due dates in blue and in black. And so every due date is always either on a Wednesday or a Friday, and they're always due at 11:59 p.m. So this Wednesday, which obviously was yesterday, I was hoping that you would get your photo voice done and your syllabus quiz done, but that's going to be extended to this Sunday, which will be the 21st. So by this Sunday, you should have the photo voice discussion done, the syllabus quiz done, the quiz for lesson 1 and the introduction, which is one quiz for both of those, and then the reading reflection for lesson 1. I have, yeah, so that's this week. Okay, so then for next week, looking just down, just to show you the pattern, for Wednesday, you have the lessons 2 quiz due and the lesson 2 reading reflection due. And then on the 28th, on Sunday next week, you'll have the first challenge due, either challenge 1 or 2, or you can do both for extra credit. And then, of course, lesson 3 quiz and the lesson 3 work. Okay, and we'll talk more about lesson 3, of course, when we get there. Okay. Any questions about the schedule? All right. So if you read the big ideas Professor Wesch has put forward for this textbook, it reads like a sort of it's a master thesis in a way. It's his statements that he's making with these big ideas, and it really does help summarize what we're going to be approaching this semester. People are different, so we're just going to go through each of these. People are different. These differences represent the vast range of human potential and possibility. Our assumptions, beliefs, values, ideals, even our abilities are largely a product of our culture. We're going to look at how culture constructs. It's called culture construction. Culture is a product of a group of people, and that is throughout the semester. That's the theme: is looking at how we are unique because of our culture, and how other people are different because of their culture, and understanding differences, understanding why we're different. There's second big idea, or the first challenge for that, just to highlight what the challenge is for that idea. Your first challenge is to go out into the world and meet a stranger, hear their story, and ask if you can share it, or create a portrait of someone you already know that really says something about them and includes a caption or story that humanizes the person and draws the viewer closer to them. I've given an example of what I did a year or two ago. So I'll be giving examples to challenges where I can. Not always can I do that, but when I can, I will give examples from both me and the students of past semesters. The second big idea is we can respond to these differences with hate or ignorance, or we can choose to open up to them and ask questions we have never considered before. So for that challenge, I ask you to look at our own culture and to find something strange about it. In my example, I've looked at funerals, and it's a photo essay of a funeral, but not most importantly, I'm not just putting a bunch of photos up there of a funeral. I'm using the photos to critique and to sort of break down how a funeral has, one, a economic value, two, social value, and three, what we call superstructure, which is belief value, what people believe. So if you want to do this particular challenge, that's what you'll do with your photo essay. Talk more about this, a little bit more about this when we get into challenge 2. Challenge lesson 3 is when we open up to such questions, we put ourselves in touch with our higher nature. So if we approach differences and we open up to these ideas that differences present to us from other cultures, we can grow as people. In other words, asking questions, making connections, and trying new things brought us down from the trees and took us to the moon. And we can continue to travel in our own different individual ways by doing so. So for that challenge, I ask you to try something new in your life. It's called a 14-day challenge. And we'll talk about that, of course, more. Number 4, it's not easy to see our assumptions. Our most basic assumptions are embedded in the basic elements of our everyday lives. Our language is what we are probably least, well, for those who are linguistically sort of oriented, it's not. But for most of us, language, our own language, and what we say and how we say it, is something that we are completely sort of, kind of not conscious of. And so this is all about bringing consciousness to ideas of our practices, what we do in our lives, bringing it to our awareness and analyzing it. So I ask you to, in this challenge, to create a new word and explain its meaning. So again, more on that later. 5th, big idea is we create our tools and then our tools create us. This is one that many people enjoy. It is about looking at our tools of technology. And I ask you for 48 hours to give up a piece of technology and then talk about it or write about it. Number 6, most of what we take as reality is a cultural construction. So this is about looking at looking at our social lives and looking at how everything around us, our families, our marriage, it's culturally constructed. It is something that is because we see differences from culture to culture to culture, people do this differently. So therefore it is something that is obviously not biological, it's cultural. There are biological components to things, and we'll talk about that, but definitely I ask you in this challenge to get yourself uncomfortable by going out and meeting somebody and talking to somebody. Now this one actually, I have you go visit a culture that makes you uncomfortable. So going to a church, going to a restaurant, do something that you've never done before that is going to make you discomforted. Number 7, we fail to examine our assumptions not just because they are hard to see, but also because they are safe and uncomfortable. They allow us to live with a flattering illusion that I am the center of the universe. Somebody needs to mute themselves, please. Kaylee, I think. Kaylee, please. Thank you. I am the center of the universe, and what matters are my immediate needs and desires. So this is about looking at our ethnocentrism. I ask you to go interview somebody here in this particular challenge, to go interview somebody that is of a different culture or a different viewpoint, a different framework for seeing the world. This is about superstructure, about beliefs. So we look at religion in this challenge. Number 8, our failure to move beyond such a view has led to the tragedy of our times, that we are more connected than ever, yet feel and act more disconnected. So this looks at globalization. We'll look at how the global communications has connected us through media, quite we're very integrated in a way, in that way. But in another way, we are so disconnected from what is happening in the other parts of the world, including people in our own world, because of, again, it comes back to media. Um, and so, yes, this will be one that'll be fun for some of you to look at, globalization and how it is both, connected and disconnected us. And so number 9, memorizing these ideas is easy. Living them takes a lifetime of practice. Fortunately, the heroes of our all time have walked before us. They show us the pathway that we could potentially take. And this is just looking at a couple of key figures, Gandhi, MLK, some other names that are, big in our the narrative of our existence, and looking at how to live our lives and how to live a good life. What is a good life? That's what we'll start out as. What is a good life? What defines that? That's a cultural construct in itself. The idea of what a good life is. So, yeah, number 9 is an interesting one. Number 10, these are all really interesting. Number 10, they show us that collectively, these heroes, they show us collectively what we make the world, that we can make the world. Understanding how we make the world and how it could be made or understood differently is the road towards realizing our full human potential. It is the road to true freedom. And so this is where I ask you to write your own manifesto and to what you learned through this class and your vision for yourself in the future. So, all right, those are the big ideas. Any questions? Any questions? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. All right. See no questions, no hands raised. I hope this will change when we get in person, because I think that definitely we have a tendency to sit back in the verse. Hey, Wendy.
Yes. Yes. The first challenge, um, I tried to do it the other day to start on it, but um I, so my question is on the first one.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really necessarily have to be another culture that you go and
No,
talk to. It's just anybody.
yeah. So here we're in the
Okay.
first one. It's open book. Anybody, but you're just trying to create a portrait of this person with the image that you take, but also with the snippet or the highlight of your conversation. Most people choose to um, uh, ask a couple of big questions, which we'll talk about big questions, um, in a moment, and then sort of have a conversation with somebody and draw upon that conversation, or summarize it, or actually, or paraphrase it, or just present a couple of the questions you asked and the answers of the person. So as my example gives, it's short, it's not a lot, just whatever is a signature from the experience of your interaction. Okay.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Wendy?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. So let's jump into talking just a little bit about field work. Because basically what you're going to be doing this whole semester is snippets of the field work that anthropologists have done. Um, and it's a very much well gets you to experience, in sort of small little ways, how anthropologists work. Robert Gardner is a landmark anthropologist who spent a lot of his work focusing on death rituals of African and Papua New Guinea cultures that he went into, and what I love about this image in particular is it's him at work with a camera, and of course somebody taking a picture of him at work as camera. And anthropologists like to stay traditionally in the background of what they're documenting. That's traditional anthropologists. They're tend to try to escape the camera, so to speak. In our anthropology of today, it's about bringing into focus ourselves in the process, because um, we accept today that there is no thing such thing as a completely objective um, perspective of other cultures. That our perspective and how we see other cultures that are different from us, we have a history to that perspective, and that is something called what we call ethnocentrism, bias. Um, it's what we were raised. It's how we were raised, and so bringing ourselves into the camera is something it's part of it now. It's part of it. And so yeah, this is Robert Gardner. If you want to check him out, he's got great his sort of landmark documentaries called Dead Birds. So a lot of his work is documentary based. Um, and there, but let's talk about me, if you don't mind. So this and like I said, we are about bringing today the anthropologists into focus, and really I look at this class as a training to become an anthropologist. And so what a lot of people come into this course looking to study other cultures and to study um, to do the traditional breakdown of cultures. I used to teach that kind of class. This textbook really shifted how I approach it, and it's more about you understanding your own culture first, so that you can understand other cultures. Um, and so we are going to look at other cultures, but it's always first starting with ourselves. And so for this class, starting with myself, um, this is and when we're okay, so the word enculturation is it's a it's one that's probably not thrown around in your everyday vernacular, um, but it is in anthropology. It's a really important word that is says that I am taught how I see the world. It's a lot of how I see the world. It's because of my experiences, and so starting out, my family. We all start with our families, and so yes, I was younger brother my brother was 17 months older than me, and yes, that's me, the chunky baby in the middle there, the blonde hair. Um, and yes, I have a younger sister that's 7 years younger than me. And so there's the pretty package of early 80s, 1980, probably 81, but I was raised in the 70s, and father rose to be a very successful orthodontist here in Chattanooga. He's from Chattanooga. My mom's from Nashville. And so pretty traditional Southern family, very religious, very religious. I went to Baylor and private school here in Chattanooga. Um, but I took a different path than a lot of people take that come out of Baylor and come out of a family like this. And that's what made me an anthropologist, actually, is the path but I was raised with these values, that very white, Southern Baptist, we became Presbyterians, but both my parents were Southern Baptist. Um, and so, yes, this was the family. And then the next layer of enculturation typically is when we go off to school. And so our experience at school, mine was not a good, to say the least. I was um, so if you want to guess in your mind before I show you who I am, this is me. And this is second grade, and this is the first time that the school system failed me. I failed second grade. Then I failed fifth grade. I got into trouble. I didn't pay attention. I Christmas tree test. I was just really, floundering, and I probably had some ADHD stuff going on. I had stuff that they couldn't diagnose probably going on, but it was a mess. It wasn't the most, my experience and my memories are not the best of elementary school. So I got pegged as an F student, a bad student, and behaviorally I was bad too. And so categories are things that anthropologists have constantly been working to deconstruct and to break down and to completely understand their impact. And so to put a student as a F student is something that happens to a lot of folks, and it sets them on a direction that is not. If you've ever heard of the term of a self-fulfilling prophecy, it becomes self-fulfilling. And so categories, when we approach differences in people, we like to categorize folks and put them in their boxes. And anthropologists, we are always trying to break down those boxes and to understand why people are who they are, the history, in other words. In second grade, when I had that experience in second grade, my parents sent me to a private school for a couple years, which didn't work out so great, but it was Saint Nicholas, Brainerd at the time, and there was a teacher named Miss Thatcher, and this is her taking a picture. I'm taking a picture of her, and then she gives us cameras, Polaroid cameras, and this was my first experience of taking photos. Um, and I really I gravitated. I was like, this was something that was really I really thought was great. I enjoyed it. And to be taking this in second grade, I guess it was third grade by the time I was taking this class, I was like, I was framing the world at this moment. And that's what's great about a camera is it's a way to frame the world and how you see it. And so yeah, I started doing well in this class. It was the only one I did well in. It's the only one I completed really. It was a self-paced school, so it wasn't the right environment. So they sent me back to the public school system, and I survived public school and ended up somehow or another getting into Baylor. My brother was there, so I got in probably because of him. He was an A student. Um, and so, yeah, but in high school, by the time I got into high school, I had found my niche, and that was sports. Sports was my way to be a success. Athletics was my outlet. Academics, I was a C student basically, and my best friend, and I show you this picture. I'm this guy right here. If I can get there, he is. Very serious group here. Me too. A little bit too serious about ourselves. But we were good, by the way. We were really good. We finished third in the state. But my best friend was the African American on the front row, Eric Smith. He and I became best friends in seventh grade and stayed best friends and still call each other best friends, even though we don't stay in touch at all very, very much. And so I I started to spend the night at his place in eighth grade, I think, and he started spending the night in my place, and eventually realized the West Side projects were a lot more fun than Signal Mountain. And so I spent a lot of time in the West Side with him all the way through high school. His family became partly an extension of my family, his friends, same way, my friends, and we carried on. And um, so my one outlet outside of sports was this one teacher in high school, Dr. Lanza, and he recognized that I was really busting my butt in his class, and he raised my book one time, and he showed it to the class, said, because I used to take notes in his class because he made me want to learn. I think good teachers make even students like me want to learn. But he said, this is what a student's book should look like with notes in it and everything. I was like, yeah, so I made an A in his class, one of the few. Again, it's about breaking down the box, and sometimes we have to do it um, in non-traditional ways. Um, so I show this picture because we're getting ready to talk about big questions in life. In our culture, we don't have the structure that other cultures have to tell you, okay, look, your next phase in life is going to be, you need to go through this ritual in order to decide or to take you to the next place. It's really our culture is about, we live leave the individual um, to their devices. I'm sorry, I got ambulances outside of my house, and I'm in a fire truck, and I just want to make sure it's got nothing to do with me. um, I think it's our neighbors. Okay, yeah, sorry. um, yeah, so I got to the point at my senior year. I did graduate. Eric, he went off to play at UTK with Don DeVoe, and I was left to my devices and really went to UTK as well. He majored in basketball, and I majored in fraternity life, actually. And these questions, I ask you to ask big questions this entire semester. Um, and because you start out with your first assignment, challenge one, to ask somebody some big questions. Well, big questions are what anthropologists grapple with. And but we do so by not looking at other cultures, but ourselves. So we ask ourselves all the time, who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? These are individual questions that we, as anthropologists, we like to turn into the collective, where we ask, who are we? Where are we going? Are we going to make it? So these big questions, often, however, individually, they turn us. This is my major for the first 2 years of college at UTK in Knoxville, as a frat boy. Yes, I am on your left. Um, that is me. And this is how, as far as our ritual of becoming adults, this is an example. And I wouldn't say I was becoming an adult at all here. I was just taking the path that seemed like the funnest. And again, sometimes structures are good for others and not great for everybody, but it's good for some folks. So I dropped out after 2 years at Knoxville, 1.4 GPA. And I landed myself back into Chattanooga, and was at this chicken factory on the corner of Main and Broad. It was called Seaboard at the time. And I walked in as a 21-year-old college dropout, and got a $7 an hour or $6 an hour quality control clerk position, which some people on the front line of that factory would work for 20, 25, 30 years and would love to have had that job. But I, with my white privilege, walked in and got that job because my dad knew the general manager of the factory. Um, but there is where my anthropology and my understanding of privilege and of differences really took on a different direction and a different level. I was confronted with that privilege, and I listened to it. And I also was confronted with African American population, which that factory and other chicken factories, I mean, it was 80% frontline were African Americans. Today, it's more like, they're a minority compared to the Latino American populations that are in there. So the dynamics change, but it's very similar, where people of color are the front line and the people who are white are management. Pretty much, well, that's pretty standard. So this was probably the best education I had up to this point for me, is to be confronted with this. And I worked there for 2 years. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it because I was learning and I was making my own money also. And they paid for my school. If I went back to college because of being here, I started going to school at night. And I stayed in that mode until I finished my PhD, as far as working during the day and going to school at night. But I worked there for a couple years. I was seeing my ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the dynamic in anthropology that we are constantly trying to become aware of, and that we're seeing our own seeing. It's like seeing the color of your own eyes. And often we need a mirror to see that. And so seeing our own seeing is something that we'll be talking about throughout this semester. But it is ethnocentrism in essence is the belief that our own cultural practices and what we do is the natural way and it's the proper way. Um, so yeah, that's something that is obviously adds to racism and sexism and various other isms. We'll talk about this religion, and this is where we get into our problems often today with the issues we have around the world. Or do we have any questions? I'm doing all the talking here. I'm sorry. This is just if anybody has any questions or comments as we go along, if you raise your hand, I'll actually hear the bing, and it'll catch my attention that somebody's raised their hand. But at this point, I'm not connecting that anybody is needing to say anything, so or ask a question. But please feel free to. Um, so this ethnocentrism is a prison of the mind. It really is a prison of the mind. It limits us. It limits our imagination, limits our ability to think outside the box. So people around the world behave and act differently. And a big question that we have in anthropology is why can't we behave and act differently? And to grow, we have to learn to act. We have to grow. We have to change our behavior sometimes. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we do. But this class is really about looking at what we do and maybe asking ourselves, maybe I could change this. So these questions of these big questions that we'll talk about this semester, they'll take you far. But if they just remain questions and not actually dealt with, then we stay where we are. So big questions can take us further. But if we don't actually get on the boat and go somewhere and do something about those questions and try to answer those questions for ourselves, and whatever that boat can be, that boat can take you just to your own backyard or to a new book or to, a website. Usually it's about making another human connection, though. For me, I knew I had to get out of Tennessee, and I had to find out. And I'd seen the movie Easy Rider one too many times. Ended up with a Harley Davidson and took a trip to California, and this was me on the trip to California. It was a 3-week trip, round trip, and I landed in San Francisco, and I did a U-turn out of San Francisco, and I came right back, whatever, a week later, and found myself, given my notice at my work in Nashville. I was living in Nashville at the time, and saying I'm moving to California without a plan. I loaded everything up, but I knew that there were things out there that I needed to connect with. I didn't know anybody there, but I had questions that I thought that I could learn something new out there that I need, and I needed to escape an identity that I had developed in Tennessee that wasn't the most healthy identity. Um, so when we take ourselves to new places, we often find ourselves with what we refer to as culture shock. I have to ask the question. I always like to ask students, have you ever experienced culture shock? Have you ever, raise your hand if you can give a quick little snippet of your culture shock. Geez, let me see if I can stop sharing. I can see trying to get out of the country this year and get, yeah, Emmanuel. I hear you. Yeah, that is where it usually happens. Kat, got your hand raised?
You hear me at all?
Huh?
Oh, I'm sorry, can you hear me better? You just text it in the chat. I'm wearing earbuds. Don't think they're
I'm having a hard time hearing. So yeah, I'm asking if you've experienced culture shock, and if anybody wants to share the experience of having culture shock. Mika? Stick her hand down. Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, I went over to India a couple of years ago, and that was a completely different way of thinking. And actually, it's incredibly much fun. I highly recommend it. But that was just a totally different way. So I
Yeah.
highly suggest that.
Yeah, India is where a lot of people have their heads turned around in circles a couple times.
Yeah,
Just
and it's just completely different, but a lot of fun.
yeah, we'll talk. We'll sort of highlight some things of India in the future, and I'd love to hear as we go along your experiences. Cody?
When I was in Bahrain, going to one of the souks, one of the malls there, the expectation of haggling at every single storefront and it being an almost an offense whenever I would try to just have a set price, like I would pay you over to not haggle, but that just being like rude, like that just threw me for a loop.
Yeah, one thing that as far as culture shock goes, it's often the small minutia of daily life that is the most thwarting, the most difficult to grapple with, like going to the store and being able to communicate what you want and what you need in the moment. And that's, that's all about, I mean, I think we've all experienced it on different levels. But when you travel, it's thrown at your face in a heavier way than others. But definitely you can experience it right here in your backyard if you're open to it. But that's the thing is we've closed doors even in our personal lives. But yes, thank you all for sharing. Let me get back to sharing my video. Like I said, I can't see unless I break down the sharing window. I can't see y'all very well. I can see one or two faces, but not. Anyway, so culture shock, the feeling of disorientation experienced by someone who is suddenly subject to an unfamiliar culture. It can so disorienting. That's the best way I can describe it. I went to the south of Italy, and I've spent a few months in the south of Italy and in Calabria. It's probably where I felt it the heaviest because it was language that I didn't have, and that definitely is, take your words away from yourself, and that is just humbling. I think Americans should experience that as a rite of passage. And Professor West says you got to step out into a new dance floor, and not only do you feel lost, but you might feel like you lost yourself, and that's a great capture, if you ask me. So for me, when I went out to San Francisco, my camera and my the framework for how I saw the world just really came alive, and I started, San Francisco is just full of homeless people, and I really gravitated to being on the street and taking pictures on the street and street photography. So this was in all my photos are in film. It's still are actually, most of them are. But so this is from when I moved out there, which was in 1997. Um, and I stayed out there till 2011. But here in these first couple years, the homeless populations really sort of captured my attention, and I went to work as a social worker. I had done social work in Chattanooga after I had gotten out of the prison. I mean, out of the foreshadowing what I'm going to talk about. Get out of the chicken factory, and so this was just me doing some street work, but I wasn't really connected. I was connecting to people with the camera, but not as well as I could. Um, and I was also on the outside. And when you're on the outside of relationships, that disorientation and that feeling of aloneness is really accentuated. It's really difficult sometimes. And I was there, but I didn't have any people I knew. So I felt very alienated, and taking pictures was kind of my outlet. Um, George Cooley says that, I'm not what I think I am. And I'm not what you think I am. I am what I think that you think I am. So if you take relationships and you mute them, you don't have relationships, and you're not seeing yourself well through the eyes of others. That's disorienting. It's like I said, it's a sense of um of alienation, and that's culture shock for you. That really is culture shock. You're seeing yourself new through new sets of eyes, or not being able to see yourself very clearly. Um, and so I went to work at a hotel called the Rose Hotel, and it was Skid Row, part of the Tenderloin in San Francisco. This is Sixth Street, but it's referred to as the Street of the Walking Dead by some. And as you see, that's the lobby. Are you a rose or a thorn? Is the quote up on the banner. And I really kind of I started to work on my dissertation in anthropology here when I was working at this hotel, and I became close with a lot of the residents. So I was a social worker in the lobby, and the residents could come down and see me and the other social workers for help. And so this became my avenue to connecting to people. Um, and I ran an art group in which people could take pictures or draw pictures or whatever they wanted to do in the art class. Basically left it to them to decide. And this was a way of what we call, for me, a form of participant observation. I was outside of this culture still in a way, but I was participating in it as a helper, as a social worker. And that's anthropology. Anthropology is about taking a role in a culture, participating in it while you're observing it and learning from it as an outsider. Um, and what we are often observing are typical characteristics. That is the dance. What are the dance moves on this culture? What are the what how do you negotiate a culture? What are the rules? You know, how do you where do you go to the bathroom? Where do you eat? How do you eat? How do you use the bathroom? You know, the most basic functions of biological are all done differently around the world. And so for participant observation, you're participating, you're starting to become part of it, but you're also documenting it and observing it. And this is, of course, um, what Professor West says you have to do. Questions may take you further than you ever could imagine, but if you don't open up and connect with people when you get there, it won't matter. It's mute. It makes no difference. You might as well just stay at home. You're just staying in your own little shell. And so in this class, I ask you to get out of your shell and to participate. So that's what I did with working at this hotel, and my photography really changed, and how and who I took pictures of and the connection I had with them, as you see. Um, so the Anthropologist Toolkit says that first we have to communicate. So if we don't communicate, like I said, it's mute. It's pointless in doing what we're doing. By communicating, we can become more thoughtful of others, and we can become more reflective of ourselves, and therefore we can become more empathetic towards others. And then we can become better communicators as we become more empathetic. So this goes in circles. The better we empathize, the more better we communicate, and the more thoughtful we become because we're more understanding. So first off, this is what we call cultural relativism. When we get to you could say the antithesis, the opposite of ethnocentrism is cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is about letting go of your ethnocentrism, letting go of your bias, your centered sort of bias, and seeing the perspective of the others by communicating with them and understanding them. So and that again makes you more reflective of your own culture and from which you originate. So you start looking back at your own culture and your own understandings, and you realize, oh wow, this is why I do what I do, because of this experience from when I was 12 years old, or the family dynamic, or the school dynamic, all that. For me, I always see, you know, what I was experiencing as leading towards becoming an anthropologist and understanding the prison, which is what I started to do for my dissertation, was study prisons. And I went into San Quentin, and which is outside of California, and I started I was volunteering at San Quentin for about a year and a half before the organization that I was. We were a educational, Quaker-based educational organization called AVP, Alternative to Violence Project. We got kicked out of San Quentin and all the California prisons because we were bringing in M&Ms, giving giving hugs to men when we got there, and then when they left prison, we carried on relationships with them after prison, which is a big no-no, because if you're going into a prison and you're bringing your outside to inside, when somebody gets out on parole, you're not supposed to be connected with them because you're going in to the same prison that they're not allowed in anymore. It's complicated and convoluted, but we were kicked out because of that. And AVP is all over the world, in prisons all over the world. But we were kicked out of California prisons. Yeah, this is San Quentin. It's referred to as paradise and hell. I mean, hell and paradise, excuse me. And right from the jail cells, the prison cells, they can see the San Francisco Bay Area and see Alcatraz Island and see the city across the bay. It's beautiful, but it's also, when you're in prison, it's kind of torturing too. So at the time, and I'll revisit this, we don't have time for me to talk much about this. I started to study, when I was going into the prisons, I started to study theater. And I thought, when we got kicked out of San Quentin, and this is me and some giant puppets, I started to think, well, what if we started doing theater inside of prisons? And I tried to get a theater group inside of San Quentin, but I'm thankful that it didn't happen because I wasn't ready to teach a theater group inside of San Quentin. So I opened up the very early, this is 2001. I opened up the web and found theater groups over in Europe. And this was the first prisoner that I connected with. His name is Paul Malcolm, and he was in prison for 13 years for killing a man, and then he got out and he basically did a one-man show. He had a theater group inside of his prison. He was in the UK, and after prison, he got out and he rejoined with the director and started a company called The Escape Artist. And he performed his single solo man show, and still does to this day. This is Paul. And I started to do my dissertation focused on prisoners' lives as they discovered theater inside of prisons. I traveled to, as in this case, I traveled to prisons in the UK. I traveled to Germany. This is Tegel Prison in Berlin. And I traveled to, again, this is another prison in UK. What's significant about both these prisons is they had white men and black men, neo-Nazis and African originated men, people who hated each other outside of the prison that were doing theater together. And that was a theme throughout my studies of prison theater. And this is actually in Ireland, where a group of Republicans Republicans are Catholics, loyalists tend to be Protestants, and they were at war with each other outside on the streets. But in prison, they created theater. So this is I didn't get to take a camera inside a prison here. Most prisons won't allow cameras inside. But I got to know the former prisoners who were inside, and they told their stories. Again, theater became an avenue for people to connect with each other, and to have a voice inside a prison where they're typically voiceless. In Italy, I went to Calabria and went to the mafiosa prison where prisoners who were part of different mafia families outside were killing each other outside, but inside they were creating theater together. And this is a quote from the prisoners. The freedom, solitude, and journey of each man is unique, important, cannot be repeated. But the real importance is the journey of the collective, as each experience is the accumulation of every relationship in each of our lives. So what this is to me was saying is that our voices, as a group, every individual journey, every individual person is important. But the real importance is the collective as we experience our reality. And so their differences and were broken down in their experience inside their common experience in prison. Jack Abbott is a author. The late Jack Abbott is an author, and actually he was in prison for life for killing a man. He writes, "The concept of death is simple. It is when a living thing no longer entertains experience. So when a man is taken further and further away from experience, he's being taken to his death." So again, connecting back to the prison is a way for me to talk about anthropology, and actually connecting to people like these prisoners were connecting with each other. It broadened their scope of people and people who are different from each other, and allowed them to educate and rise to a higher power than themselves in their own individual lives. The prison tends to take the voice and take the experience and shut it off. So we're not educating people inside a prison. We're in a sense, we're taking them to a living death. And so I say that by saying that this class, and I'm asking you in this class to connect with people and connect with cultures that are different from you, so that you can live your life more fully and experience life differently. So the goal of the class is to experience more, experience difference, experience differently. And the reason behind this is that because by experiencing more and becoming more, our experiences are who we are. That is all we've got, really, in relationships, in our experiences of relationships. And this is the story of our lives. So that's anthropology in a nutshell. So um, we'll stop sharing. And I think, yeah, right at the moment of the hour of our time together. And are there any questions? Yes, Cody, you're right. It's the oldest prison. The amenities were amazing. Well, I can talk more about that in detail. It's I will stay on for another few more minutes, and definitely will take any questions or any concerns that you have about the class. And I'll see the rest of y'all on Tuesday. And thank you for staying to the end. Have a good weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.